Hey, this is JC and welcome to Small Brick City, where we want to help you build a Lego city regardless of the space you have. This video is in response to a comment that subscriber Ron Valance left in a previous video where I showed how a small Lego city can be designed with variety and density in mind to be awesome. Ron requested if I could take out the different buildings so that he could see how the different roads were laid out and planned around the buildings. In my case, when I refer to roads, I don't just mean roads for vehicles, but it refers to any kind of access path, whether they're smaller roads like alleys, pedestrian-only roads, or even sidewalks. So any kind of access path where vehicles or minifigs can go through would be considered roads in the context of my Lego city designing. I understand the issue at hand. Ron wanted to see how the different roads were laid out in relation to the buildings so that he could apply it to his own Lego city. However, I think just taking out the buildings and showing how the roads are laid out with the different base plates might not be the best solution, as that would show just one example of how the roads are laid out in that specific city. I think the issue at hand is to come up with a basic understanding, concept, or even an approach to designing road layouts for a Lego city so they can be applied to any brick city that you're building. And that's what I'm going to try to do in this particular video. I should mention the technique that I'll be showing applies to small Lego cities. And when I mean small, maybe they span a couple of tables, maybe 6 to 8 of the tables that you see in front of you. So this particular technique, and you'll understand it when I show it to you later and explain why, may not apply to Lego cities which are built in an entire basement or a garage or in a 500 square foot room. However, I think 90% of the people who have Lego cities probably have them confined on just several tables and don't have a whole room or basement just for the Lego city. So this video is for you. What I've done here is chosen a couple of different size buildings to create a Lego city. I've taken out all the minifigs and all the small builds because that's not important for the context of this particular demonstration. I just want to show how you can lay out different roads around different size buildings to create a logical and aesthetically pleasing Lego city. I've got an expert modular building behind, that's the downtown diner. I've got two half modular buildings. I've got a smaller build here for a coffee shop. This is a standalone mini house. Incidentally, if you want free building instructions for this particular mini house, head over to smallbrickcity.com and you can download them for free. Behind is a base plate with 5 different buildings, and I've showed this particular base plate before in previous videos, and you can check out the playlist of those videos in the description below. But that's basically a 32 by 32 stud base plate with 3 smaller buildings, each measuring 8 by 8 studs, and 2 larger buildings opposite them. Essentially, this is a cluster of different sized buildings, all of different heights, sizes, and footprints. And what I'm trying to do is to create different layouts with roads running between these buildings so that everything comes together as a cohesive city layout, or at least a small city layout. My goal is to design layouts that are logical, aesthetically pleasing, and work in the context of a Lego city on display in a home. So if you are thinking of creating a layout for a small Lego city, the first thing I suggest you do is to work on one specific district. Take a bunch of buildings that you want to feature in this particular district and place them onto the table or on the spot of the table that you're currently working on. Then I suggest you take a couple of spare base plates, and the base plates that I typically use for roads would be base plates like this. You can use a half base plate, 16 by 32, or even the smaller 8 by 16, or you can also cut these in half or cut a regular base plate into 4 pieces so that you get an 8 by 32. Basically, you want spare base plates like this, which will act as the different roads you can lay out. If you do not have any base plates at this point, you can take pieces of paper or cardboard as well. Once you figure out your layout using the cardboard as your template, you can then either order the base plates or custom create them as you need. So with that groundwork set, let's start designing the layouts. I've switched to an overhead view of the buildings so that you can see all the buildings in frame, and I'm going to create the layouts in real time and explain my process and thinking along the way. And hopefully this process will be clear and you can use it and apply it for your own Lego city. So the first thing I want to do anytime I want to create a layout for a certain section for a city or even a whole city, depending on how big it is to pick out one central feature, building or area in my city that will be the focal point of my city. That I think is really important. Anytime you build a city, start with one central feature. It could be a building, it could be an area like a beach or a park, whatever it might be. If that is your focus, that will be your focus, and that should be built or set first, and then you would build everything around there. Now that's why I said this applies to smaller cities or towns. If you think about old towns and old cities, they really started with the main buildings, whether it's a town hall or a church or a common area or building. And then the rest of the city was built out from there, starting from that main location. And I think that applies for small Lego cities as well. If you have a huge Lego city, this approach may not work because you really need to calculate the amount of space you have when you have a large space. And that is how modern city planning is done now. Once they figure out the space, they think of the infrastructure in terms of the roads and where major facilities might be, like an airport or a port. And that is all laid out, the road network is laid out, and then the buildings are built around this infrastructure. But that really only works for a Lego city when you have a really large space. But when you have a smaller space, like just a couple of tables, I think that's not the approach to use. I would suggest using this approach of picking one central building or area and starting from there. So in this case, I'm going to use the biggest build, the downtown diner, as my central location. And because this is a Lego city that is designed for viewing, I'm going to put it behind because it's so big. Because if I put it in front and I have smaller buildings behind it, it defeats the purpose because people might not be able to see the small buildings behind the larger building. So it makes perfect sense in the context of this particular setup to have the downtown diner against the wall and behind. So that will be my central build. The next thing I'm going to do is to place the other two modulars, and this is simply because of the size again. So to me it makes sense just to put these two buildings together. Now I'm not thinking about the type of building in this particular demonstration. I'm just talking about the different sizes. So if we happen to have two food establishments together, it may not make sense in a real city. Oh, it does make sense in a real city, but in the context of this demonstration, we aren't going to worry what the different nature of businesses or type of buildings they are. So with that said, this looks pretty nice, but I always like to think in terms of texture and variety for a Lego city. And one way to add variety, and I've mentioned this before, is to add alleys. Too many Lego cities I see have large roads for vehicles, but they don't have these small roads. And I'm always in favor of small roads like alleys or pedestrian-only roads. So I'm going to use these small base plates, and they are 8 studs wide, and I'm going to create an alley right here, and that is in between the diner and the other buildings. I think this is logical. So I'll put that there, just like that. And immediately we have some space. Visually looks interesting, and of course this will allow me to put in other small details like dumpsters or any kind of small scenes. So now to figure out where I'm going to place the other builds, because I do want to fill up the space. So let's extend this road like this. Now to me it makes sense, since this is the central building or the central feature for my city layout or this particular layout, there should be a road in front of it where cars could possibly drive to. So what I'm going to do is just move this out of the way first, and I'm going to move this particular base plate over here. And now I can put in this plate here, which acts as the road. Now I can possibly move this here. And let's see how this works. If I put this particular house over here and bring this build over here, something like this probably works. We have an alleyway here we have the main road, or at least a road for vehicles to come here where it can stop. And this can be a pedestrian only road, or we can even have vehicles coming through here. And of course, this can be demarcated with long tiles to create curbs and basically the flow of the roads. What I like about a display like this is it creates interesting blocks within this city. So they're really small city blocks, so clusters of buildings. There's this alleyway, and all the roads are connected. When I'm laying out roads, as far as I can, I try to have some kind of connection. You know, in Chinese, we talk about feng shui, which is the smooth passage of air, and something like that has a very nice flow. You see, there are two points of flow across here and here. So that feels very organic, and it gives a lot of flow to the overall city. So even if I have to place vehicles over here or small builds over here, you still feel that this city is not that cluttered, because the reason is because there's flow right through. Your mind, of course, makes up the rest of the display, even though there may not be anything else on the left and right, but you get that sense of space, and you get the sense of a clear passage through the city. So this is one layout that I would design if I had these buildings to work with for a Lego city. So let's go for another layout. First, I'm just going to remove all these spare base plates, and that's just to free up the space and not be constrained with the first design that we came up with. I think the first thing I like to do is to move the downtown diner. I'm going to use that as the central feature once again, with the same logic that it is the largest building, but I'm going to put it in the center of the display over here. What that means is I'm going to move one of these half modulars aside, so that goes there. So in this case, the downtown diner now goes in the middle of these two modular buildings, and that looks pretty good. I won't put the alley in between the buildings just so that we have a difference, but here's what we're going to do. Let's create a main road once again from the central build. So the idea is, if this is your main building, in this case it's a diner, but imagine if it was a town hall or a police station or a government building, it makes sense to have a main road that leads to that particular central building. So I'm going to put one road there, and there should be a smaller road. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this and rotate it 90 degrees. So what I've done here is now create a parallel road which is smaller. Maybe this could be a smaller road, or maybe it's pedestrian only. That leaves me with two other buildings to fill up the space, and that's going to be pretty easy. What I'll do is, because these are roads and we have the buildings, we want the buildings to face into the road, so it makes sense that the main entrance of this particular build faces the main road, and I can do that over here. Now I could do this, but just for the sake of showing what I want to do, since I do have a 4-stud space over here, this is like a small alley, so I would just turn this over so that we've got a bit of space between the two buildings here. So here we have a second layout for these buildings here. It is different from the first one, but we still have smooth passage or flow over here. There is flow actually, if you think about it, going across in front of buildings. Of course, it's not ideal, I think, because it is quite tight. So what you could possibly do, again, if you have the space, just move this over here, and you can take the 8-stud base plates and we can just put them over here. Now if I do this, I've created another either road, or this could be a pedestrian only road, or could be even for vehicles. And if I lay it out like that, you can see now I've created more space between the buildings. We've got distinct city blocks, which is a feature I like for Lego cities, and we've got nice flow across here, here, and here. So that's a second city layout. So we've come up with two different city layouts using the same basic approach. Choose a central building and place the buildings and roads around it so that there's flow with the roads. Let's try something completely different now, and let's just remove these base plates instead of just focusing on a building as a central feature, let's go with a small area. And what that means is, I mentioned a park earlier on, or some kind of recreational area. So let's think if we can create one of those for this particular layout. And I'm going to pair it with the diner. Again, this being a large building, I think it makes sense. So in this case, my focus is not going to be just this one building, but it'll be a park or maybe a lake or pond or something like that in front of the diner. So that means I can't have the diner all the way there, and that's assuming I want to work with the same space. So let's move things around. And this time I'm going to move the diner more to the front. Now if I place it somewhere here, this does means that whatever is behind the diner cannot be too small. That means all these small builds can't be placed behind the diner. So I'm going to use the 2 half modular buildings, but to make things interesting, what I'm going to do is to turn them out. And I'm going to assume, at least for this particular layout, it'll be viewed from the point of view from 3 sides. So if I have visitors coming to look at this particular layout, they'll be able to go around on either side of the table to actually see the different builds. So it's okay to have these buildings face left and right. So if I place this here like that, I'm going to create an alleyway. So I'll use these small plates once again. And let's just put them all the way in as before. Space between buildings is always welcome because it's breathing space, and you have this passageway, and you can of course put in all the different scenes, whether it's minifigs or small builds. And let's place it here. I'm also working with the confines of this particular table in terms of the size, because if you're working on a table for your Lego city and you have only one table such as this one, you will be limited by the depth, so you do have to work within those constraints. So this looks like an ideal area for either a park or waterway. Let me just show you how it looked like. If you have a park, you'd use green base plates. I don't have a thin base plate in green, so I'm just using these two 16 by 16. And now you can see how this could be filled with maybe park activities like a merry-go-round, a picnic, trees and such. And that makes sense, especially for a diner. But if you wanted to put in a waterway like a lake, that could be done as well. And that looks pretty nice as well. And if this is the end of the display, we can assume that the water goes beyond it. Of course, you would have to build the curbs, and maybe you'd even have to build a breakwater or just raise up the level so that the water, doesn't overflow, logically speaking. So let's just not use the water for now, and we'll stick to this being a park. So that adds color to the city layout, and it's a bit different from the rest as well. With this figured out, I now have to place the other small builds. So let's do this. Let's have this facing over here. So again, I'm going with the principle of flow and connectivity. So there's nice flow here, there's nice flow here, and there's only one logical space left for these two builds. Now I have to decide where to put the different builds. Now I think it makes sense. Now I'm looking actually at the nature of the business, even though I said we wouldn't, but I think it makes sense in this case. Since that's a diner and everything looks in terms of a business, I'm going to put the coffee store here so that the house can come here, because this is a house as well. And I can put these two together like that. That's a bit tight, so I'm going to turn this around, because there's that fostered extra space, and that works out. So we have the passage here, the passage here, we've got that flow, we've created a new central feature, and it's not even against the wall, it's now more to the front. But now I can put all sorts of scenes and minifigs over here. If you were to look at this Lego city, you'd definitely be drawn over here first, because it's open, the colors are bright, and then you can go around to see the different things on either side. And if you look here, you'd see the different small buildings and houses. Over here you'd see another apartment, or the pet shop in this case, and you could have scenes over here. So I like this layout as well. This works for me. So this is a third possible layout. For the sake of completeness, I added in some small builds and minifigs just to dress up the area so you can see how this central feature of a park looks like in front of the diner. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and I've given you some insight on how to approach designing the roads around your buildings for your Lego city. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comments below. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't, please subscribe to the channel and do watch the next video coming up.